I never imagined I would be sitting here, telling this story. It is the kind of story you think only happens to other people, until one day, it crashes into your own life, leaving you wondering how things went so wrong. It all started with a knock on the door. Let me set the stage. I had been a cop for 23 years, and I had seen just about everything. You name it, break-ins, drug busts, domestic disputes. They were all part of the job. I had a great partner for most of that time, Matt Harris. Matt was the kind of guy who always had your back, even when the situation was falling apart. He saved my life once during a particularly rough domestic call. He got into trouble for it too, but that is a story for later. What you really need to know is that Matt and I were not just partners on the force. We were best friends. We grew up together in the same neighborhood. He, my wife Rachel, and I were the inseparable trio since we were kids. If you saw one of us, you could bet the other two were close by. We went through everything together, from high school prom to our first real jobs. When Matt became a cop 2 years before I did, it only made sense for me to follow suit. Rachel and I had been married for about 10 years by the time everything started to go downhill. We had 2 kids, Stacy and Jake, and Matt was basically their uncle. They adored him. Rachel and Matt were always close, maybe a little too close sometimes, but I never thought anything of it. We had a solid marriage, or at least, I thought we did. But then Matt retired, and that is when things began to shift. He had been on the force for 25 years, and when he finally called it quits, he moved out to California to pursue his dream of becoming a writer. I was happy for him, proud even. His book started selling, and soon enough, Matt Harris was a name people knew. Every time he came back to visit, the local news would want to interview him, and Rachel and I would be there to cheer him on. He always stayed with us when he was in town. He would fly in for a week or so, and it became a tradition for me to take time off from work so we could hang out like old times. We would grab a beer, watch a game, talk about the good old days. Rachel was always happy to see him too, maybe a little too happy now that I think back on it. One evening, everything changed. Matt was sitting on the couch, watching TV, and I was just coming home from a late shift. Rachel was in the kitchen, making dinner, humming along to some song. I barely had time to sit down when Matt looked at me with that serious face he used to get when he had something big on his mind. "Look," he said. Using my real name, he rarely did that unless it was serious. "We need to talk." I glanced over at Rachel, but she was too busy with the stove to notice the change in tone. I nodded and sat down across from him. "What is up?" I asked, trying to keep it casual, but the knot in my stomach was already tightening. "You remember that night, the domestic call, the one where I shot the woman who was about to kill you?" Matt asked, his voice low. "Of course I remember," I said, leaning back, trying to read his expression. "You saved my life. I owe you for that." "Well," he hesitated, rubbing his hands together like he was nervous, which was not like him at all. "I need to cash in on that favor." The way he said it, I knew whatever was coming was going to be bad. Real bad. I waited, not sure what to say. "I have got about a year left," he finally said, his voice breaking. "Cancer. It is inoperable. Doctors say I am on borrowed time." The words hit me like a freight train. I had no idea what to say. Matt, the guy who had always been larger than life, the one who could get out of any situation, was dying. It was too much to process. "Man, I am sorry," I said, finally finding my voice. "Anything you need, you know I am here." He nodded, looking relieved that I had said the words, but then his next sentence knocked the wind out of me. "I want Rachel to come with me on my last trip," he said. "Around the world. One last adventure before I go." At first, I thought I misheard him. "You want my wife to go with you?" I asked, leaning forward, my voice rising. "For how long?" "A year," he said, as if it was no big deal. I could not believe what I was hearing. He was asking me to let him take my wife away for a year, while he traveled the world. It was insane. "No," I said flatly. "That is not happening." Matt looked at me with those serious eyes again. "You promised me anything, Luke. After I saved your life, you said anything. I am calling in that favor." I stood up, feeling the blood rush to my head. "Not this. I cannot promise you this. Rachel is my wife. I am not lending her out to anyone, not even you." Before I could say more, Rachel appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel, her face flushed. "Look," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I already told Matt I would go." I stared at her, stunned. "You what?" "I am going with him," she said, crossing her arms, her eyes locking with mine. "He is dying, and this is his last wish. You promised him, and I am honoring that promise." It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. The woman I had been married to for 10 years, the mother of my children, was telling me she was leaving me for a year to go on some grand adventure with another man, a man who was supposed to be my best friend. I stood there, my fists clenched at my sides, trying to control the rising anger. "I do not care what you promised him," I said through gritted teeth. "You are not going." But Rachel just shook her head. "You do not own me, Luke. This is my choice, and I have already made it." I was not sure what was worse, the fact that Matt had asked, or the fact that Rachel had agreed. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned by what I had just heard. The room felt too small, the walls closing in as the weight of everything Matt and Rachel had said sunk in. I could not believe this was happening. Not to me. Not to my family. "You can't be serious," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling with disbelief. "This is insane, Rachel. You're really going to leave me? Leave our kids? For him?" Rachel's expression didn't change. Her mind was already made up. She spoke in that same calm, controlled tone she always used when she thought she was doing the right thing, even when it was tearing everything apart. "I'm not leaving you, Luke," she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "This isn't about us. This is about helping Matt, our friend. He is dying. What kind of people would we be if we didn't help him fulfill his last wish?" Her words were like knives. Each one dug deeper, and I could feel my anger rising with every passing second. This wasn't about helping a friend. This was about something else. Something I didn't want to admit to myself. Matt sat quietly, watching us. His face had softened, but I could see the determination in his eyes. He was not going to back down, and worse, neither was Rachel. It was like they had already decided this was going to happen and just needed me to accept it. "Rachel," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury, "this is not just some trip to the grocery store. You're talking about leaving me for a year. A whole year. How do you think the kids are going to take it? What do you think Stacy and Jake are going to say when their mother disappears for 12 months to travel the world with Uncle Matt?" She blinked, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "I'll explain it to them," she said quietly. "I'll tell them I am doing this for Matt, that it is only for a year. It is not like I am leaving forever." I couldn't take it anymore. I turned away from her, pacing the room as if I could walk away from this nightmare. My mind raced with all the things I wanted to say, all the reasons this was completely wrong. But the words were stuck, jumbled in my head like a traffic jam. Nothing made sense anymore. "Look," Matt said softly from the couch, his voice breaking the silence. "I know this is hard. I really do. But this is something I need. I've always loved Rachel. I never stopped. I messed up back in high school, and I've regretted it every day since. This is my last chance to spend time with her before I go." That was it. The dam broke. I spun around, my fists clenched. "You selfish son of a..." I stopped myself just short of saying it. "You don't get to ask this of me. Not after everything. You don't get to take my wife away from me, not like this." Matt stood up, his face pale but determined. "I'm not taking her, Luke. She's making this choice because she wants to help me. It's not about us. It's about me and my time running out." I wanted to punch him. God, I wanted to hit him so badly. But I held back. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. "You've got a lot of nerve," I said slowly, "coming into my house and asking me for my wife like she is some object you can borrow. If you really cared about me, or her, you would never have put either of us in this position." Matt just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Rachel took a step closer, reaching out as if to comfort me, but I pulled away. I couldn't stand her touch right now, not when everything I thought I knew about her had been shattered in an instant. "You said you would do anything for him, Luke," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with emotion. You promised him, and now he's dying. This is all he's asking for? I shook my head. I didn't promise him you. I promised him anything, not anyone. The room went silent after that. None of us knew what to say anymore. Matt lowered his gaze, looking defeated, but I didn't feel any victory in that. Rachel just stood there, her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding on for dear life. Finally, I spoke again, this time more quietly. If you do this, Rachel, if you leave with him, don't expect to come back to the same life. Things won't just pick up where they left off. You will have made a choice, and there will be consequences. I could see her struggling with my words, but instead of backing down, she set her jaw, her eyes hardening. I'm going, Luke. I love you, but this is something I have to do. When I come back, we'll figure things out. We'll make it work. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She really thought that she could just walk out for a year and then come back like nothing happened. She was delusional if she thought I would still be standing there waiting for her. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I needed air, needed to think. I could hear Rachel calling after me, but I didn't stop. I just kept walking. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside me. How had my life come to this? How had I gone from being a husband and father to standing on the edge of losing everything? I pulled out my phone and called my brother, Dan. He picked up after a few rings, his voice light and cheerful like it always was. Hey, Luke. What's up? I need a place to stay for the night, I said, my voice gruff, barely containing my emotions. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sure, man. Everything all right? Not even close, I muttered. I'll explain when I get there. I hung up without waiting for his reply and started walking towards my car. I needed space, needed to clear my head, but the anger wasn't going anywhere. I knew it was going to be a long night, and this was just the beginning of the mess I never saw coming. As I drove away, I thought about the life I thought I had, and the life I was now on the verge of losing. I spent that night at my brother Dan's place, tossing and turning on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together how everything had gone so wrong. Dan didn't push me for details when I arrived. He's the type to know when you need space, and for that, I was grateful. The silence in the room was a relief compared to the chaos I had just walked out of. But silence also left me alone with my thoughts. Rachel was really going to do this. She was going to pack her bags, leave our kids, and travel the world with Matt, all under the excuse of fulfilling some last wish. And the worst part? She thought she could come back and everything would be fine, like she had just gone on a business trip or some extended vacation. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could she think this was okay? How could Matt even ask such a thing from me? I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. But no matter how many times I thought about it, the situation never made sense. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, the sun was streaming through the blinds, and Dan was nudging me awake with a cup of coffee in hand. Rough night? He asked, raising an eyebrow as I sat up, rubbing my face. You could say that, I muttered, taking the cup from him and leaning back against the couch. Dan sat across from me, waiting for me to talk. He wasn't the type to push, but I knew he was curious. We were close growing up, and even now, he was one of the few people I trusted with anything. If anyone could understand how messed up this situation was, it would be him. Finally, I let out a deep sigh. Rachel's leaving, I said, my voice flat. Dan blinked, not fully grasping the weight of my words. What do you mean, leaving? Like, leaving you? I shook my head. Not exactly. She's going on some trip with Matt. Around the world. For a year. Dan stared at me, confusion and disbelief slowly forming on his face. Wait, Matt? As in your best friend, Matt? The guy who writes books now? That Matt? Yeah, that Matt. There was a long pause before Dan finally spoke again, his voice incredulous. And Rachel's just okay with this? She's really going? I nodded, staring into my coffee cup. She says it's because he's dying. Cancer. He's got a year left, maybe less. and this is his last wish, to travel the world, and he wants Rachel to go with him. Dan sat back, running a hand through his hair. Holy, I don't even know what to say. That is messed up, man. I mean, I get that he is dying and all, but that is your wife. How does she not see how wrong this is? I don't know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She keeps saying it is not about us, that it is about helping him. But I don't buy it. This isn't just about helping a dying friend. There is more to it. I know it. Dan was quiet for a moment, processing everything. Have you talked to her? Like, really talked to her? Maybe there is something else going on that you don't know about. I tried, I said, shaking my head, but she has made up her mind. She is going, whether I like it or not. Dan leaned forward, his expression serious. And what are you going to do about it? I didn't have an answer for him. I had spent the entire night trying to figure that out, but I was still just as lost as I was when I walked out of the house. What could I do? I couldn't physically stop her from going, and even if I could, what would that accomplish? It wasn't like I could force her to stay if she had already chosen to leave. I don't know, I admitted, my voice hollow. I can't believe this is happening. After everything, this is how it ends. Dan was silent for a long time, just watching me, probably trying to figure out the right thing to say. But there was no right thing. No words were going to make this situation better. No advice was going to magically fix my marriage. Finally, he sighed and stood up, clapping a hand on my shoulder. Look, man, you know I've got your back. Whatever you need, I'm here. But you've got to figure out what you want. If you can live with her going on this trip and coming back after a year, then fine. But if you can't, well, then you've got to start thinking about what's best for you and the kids. I nodded, though I didn't feel any better. Dan was right, but the thought of losing Rachel, of ending our marriage after everything we had been through, felt like a punch to the gut. But the thought of her going off with Matt for a year, that was unbearable too. I was stuck between two impossible choices, and either way, I was going to lose something. Later that day, I went back home. The house felt eerily quiet as I stepped inside. Rachel was in the living room, packing a suitcase. She barely looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, I just stood there, watching her silently. It hit me, seeing her pack, that this was real. She was really doing this. We need to talk, I said, breaking the heavy silence. Rachel zipped up her suitcase and stood, facing me. There is nothing left to talk about, Luke. I've already made my decision. I could feel the anger bubbling up again, but I forced myself to stay calm. You're making a huge mistake, I said, my voice steady. And if you go through with this, there is no coming back. You know that, right? She looked at me, her eyes softening for a moment, but then she shook her head. I know this is hard for you to understand, but this isn't about us. It is about Matt. He needs me. And what about me? What about the kids? Don't we need you? I'll be back, Luke. It is just a year. We'll figure things out when I get back. I laughed bitterly. A year. You're asking me to sit here and wait for you for a whole year, while you're off with him. Do you really think everything will be the same when you come back? Do you honestly believe I'll be here, waiting like nothing happened? She didn't answer, but the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. She really thought this was temporary, that I would just sit around, waiting for her to come back like nothing had changed. I took a step closer, my voice low. Rachel, if you leave, this marriage is over. I want to be here when you come back. The kids want to see you the same way. You're throwing away everything we've built. And for what? For a dying man's wish. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't back down. I love you, Luke. I really do. But I have to do this. I'm sorry, And with that, she picked up her suitcase and walked past me, heading for the door. I didn't stop her. I didn't say another word. I just stood there, watching as she left, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing through the empty house. It was over. I walked over to the couch and sat down, staring at the wall, my mind blank. The reality of what had just happened slowly began to sink in. Rachel was gone. My marriage was over. Everything I had known, everything I had worked for, was crumbling right in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I sat there for what felt like hours, the silence of the house pressing down on me. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second reminding me of how much time I had lost, how much time I had wasted. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly alone. The next few days were a blur. Rachel was gone, and I was left with a house full of memories that I could not escape. Everywhere I turned, I saw something that reminded me of her favorite coffee mug, her book on the nightstand, the way she always left her shoes by the front door no matter how many times I told her to put them away. It was like living in a museum dedicated to a life that no longer existed. The kids, Stacy and Jake, took the news about as well as you would expect. Stacy, my 15-year-old, tried to act tough, putting on a brave face, but I could see the cracks. She did not understand why her mother would just up and leave, and I could not bring myself to explain the full story. How do you tell your daughter that her mother left her family to travel the world with your best friend? Jake, on the other hand, was only 10, and his reaction was worse. He thought it was his fault. He cried himself to sleep that first night, clutching the stuffed bear Rachel had given him when he was little. I tried to comfort him, telling him that it had nothing to do with him, that his mother loved him, but how could I convince him when I was not even sure I believed it myself? Work became my escape. I started pulling double shifts, volunteering for extra duties just to keep myself busy. Anything to avoid going home to the emptiness that waited for me there. The guys at the precinct noticed something was off, but no one pressed me for details. They all knew about Rachel, and Matt. Small towns are like that. People talk, whispers spread, and soon enough, everyone knows your business whether you want them to or not. It did not take long for the rumors to start. Some people thought Rachel was having an affair with Matt, that the whole dying wish story was just a cover for something that had been going on for a long time. Others believed she was doing this out of pity, like some kind of saint, sacrificing everything for her dying friend. I heard it all, but I did my best to ignore it. The truth was, I did not even know what to believe anymore. Dan checked in on me every couple of days, dragging me out for a beer when he thought I needed it. He never said it outright, but I knew he was worried about me. I could see it in the way he looked at me, like I was one wrong step away from falling apart. And maybe I was. But I kept it together, at least on the outside. For the kids, for my job, for my own sanity. It was on one of those nights, sitting in a dimly lit bar with Dan, that he finally asked the question I had been dreading. "So, what are you going to do, Look?" Dan asked, swirling his beer in his hand. "Are you really going to wait for her? Let her come back after a year, and just pretend like nothing happened?" I took a long sip of my drink before answering. "I don't know, man. I really don't know. Part of me wants to just walk away, cut my losses, and move on. But then I think about the kids, about what they'd go through if we got divorced. I don't want to put them through that. Dan nodded, understanding. "But do you really think you can just wait for a year? What if she comes back and everything is different? What if she doesn't come back at all?" The thought of Rachel not coming back at all was one I had tried to push out of my mind. But now that Dan had said it, I could not ignore it anymore. What if she decided that life with Matt was better than life with me? What if she came back and realized she did not love me anymore? Or worse, what if she had already come to that realization but was too scared to admit it? "I don't know," I said again, my voice barely audible. "I really don't." Dan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. That's your call. But you've got to start thinking about what's best for you, man. You can't just sit here and let her control your life like this. You deserve better than that. I knew he was right, but it was easier said than done. Rachel and I had been together for so long that the idea of living without her felt impossible. We had built a life together, a family, and now that she was gone, I was left trying to pick up the pieces of something I wasn't even sure could be fixed. As the weeks passed, the reality of the situation became harder to ignore. Rachel called a few times, mostly to check on the kids, but our conversations were short, awkward. I could hear the distance in her voice, the way she carefully chose her words, as if she was tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. She never talked about her trip with Matt, and I never asked. I couldn't bring myself to. The kids would talk to her on the phone, and afterward, I could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't understand why their mom was gone, why she wasn't coming home. I did my best to explain it in a way that made sense, but how do you explain something like that to a 10-year-old and a teenager who is already grappling with the mess of growing up? One evening, after a particularly rough day, Stacy cornered me in the kitchen. She had that look on her face, the one that told me she had been thinking about something for a long time and was finally ready to confront it. "Dad, why did Mom leave?" she asked, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the vulnerability she was trying to hide. I sighed, leaning against the counter. I had known this conversation was coming, but I still wasn't prepared for it. "She is helping Matt. He is sick. You know that, Dot." Stacy frowned. "Yeah, but why does she have to be gone for so long? Couldn't she just visit him, or something?" "I don't get it, Dot." Neither did I, but I couldn't tell her that. I had to be the strong one, the parent who had the answers, even if I didn't. "It is complicated, sweetheart. Matt is going through a lot, and your mom feels like she needs to be there for him." Stacy crossed her arms, clearly unsatisfied with my vague response. "Is she coming back?" I hesitated. I wanted to tell her yes, that her mom would be back and everything would go back to the way it was. But I couldn't make that promise. Not anymore. "I hope so," I said finally. "I really do, Dot." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and left the kitchen, leaving me standing there, feeling more lost than ever. That night, after the kids were in bed, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at the same spot where Rachel had told me she was leaving. The anger had faded, replaced by a hollow ache that I couldn't shake. I didn't know how to move forward, how to rebuild my life when everything felt so uncertain. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living in limbo. I had to make a decision, one way or another. I couldn't keep waiting for Rachel to come back, hoping that things would magically fix themselves. I had to take control of my life, for my sake and for the kids. And that meant facing the reality that our marriage might be over. I stared at my phone, Rachel's number glowing on the screen. My finger hovered over the call button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. Instead, I set the phone down, stood up, and headed for the bedroom. I would figure this out tomorrow, or maybe the day after that. But for tonight, I needed sleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling as if the weight of the world was pressing down on my chest. My bed felt empty, cold even, like a ghost of what it used to be. The empty space where Rachel used to sleep gnawed at me, reminding me every morning that she was no longer there, and might never be again. It was time to accept that. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work even harder than before. I was practically living at the precinct, taking every call, every shift I could get my hands on. The guys had stopped asking questions, but I could see it in their eyes, the pity, the sympathy. They all knew Rachel was gone, and I could feel them watching me like I was a ticking time bomb. I hated that feeling. But more than anything, I hated the loneliness. I had always been a guy who valued his family above everything else, and now, without Rachel, I felt like I was drifting. Stacy and Jake were there, of course, but it was different. They were just kids trying to make sense of a world that had turned upside down. They were depending on me, but I could barely keep myself together, let alone them. One evening after work, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cold dinner that I had not touched. The kids were upstairs, quiet, probably trying to forget what their life had become. That was when my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. I stared at the screen, her name flashing in bold letters, like it was mocking me. I hadn't heard from her in over a week, and part of me didn't want to answer. What was the point? She had made her choice. But another part of me, the part that still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, things could go back to normal, forced my hand. I picked up the phone, my voice tight. "Yeah." There was a long pause on the other end, and for a second, I thought she had hung up. Then her voice came through, soft, almost hesitant. "Look, I wanted to check in, see how you and the kids are doing." I bit back the surge of bitterness that rose in my chest. "Weary, fine," I said, not even bothering to mask the edge in my voice. "As fine as we can be when their mother is halfway across the world." She sighed, and I could almost picture her running a hand through her hair, the way she always did when she was stressed. "I know this is hard," she said quietly, "but you have to believe me. I'm doing this for Matt. I'm not trying to hurt you or the kids." I wanted to laugh. She said she wasn't trying to hurt us, yet every day felt like I was bleeding out a little more. "Rachel, you're gone. Do you get that? You left us. Whether you meant to or not, you did. And now, the kids are the ones paying the price." Her silence on the other end was deafening. I wasn't sure if she was holding back tears or just trying to find the right words, but either way, it didn't matter. Nothing she said could change the fact that she had walked away from everything we had built together. "I am coming home in a few months," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need more time with Matt. He doesn't have much longer, and this trip is giving him peace, I guess." Peace. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. And what about my peace, Rachel? What about our family's peace? There was no answer, just the hollow sound of silence. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. I wasn't sure if I was more angry or heartbroken, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't keep waiting for her to decide when she was ready to come back and fix the mess she had left behind. "You made your choice," I said, my voice hardening. "So now I am making mine." Her breath caught, like she had not expected me to say that. "What do you mean?" "I am done waiting for you," I said, the words coming out stronger than I expected. "I am filing for divorce." The silence that followed was crushing. I could hear her breathing, could feel the weight of the bomb I had just dropped. And in that silence, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't relief, exactly, but it was like a burden had been lifted, a burden I had been carrying since the moment she told me she was leaving. "Luke," she started, but I cut her off. "Dante," I said firmly, "this is what's best. For me, for the kids. You can't just come back after a year and expect things to be the same. It doesn't work like that." She was quiet again, and I could tell she was processing what I had said. Maybe she thought I would never take this step. Maybe she thought I would wait forever. But I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, constantly wondering if or when she would come back, and whether I would even want her back when she did. "Is that really what you want?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. I closed my eyes, steadying myself before answering. "It's not about what I want. It's about what I need. And I need to move on. For my sake. For the kids' sake." There was a long pause on the other end, and I could feel her struggling to find the right words. "I never meant for it to end like this," she finally whispered. "Neither did I said, my voice softer now. "But this is where we are. You made your choice, Rachel. Now I'm making mine." For a moment, I thought she was going to say something else, something that would make me reconsider. But instead, all I heard was a soft, defeated "okay." Then, the line went dead. I set the phone down on the table, staring at it for a long moment. It was over. Really, truly over. And while a part of me felt like I had just ripped out my own heart, another part of me felt free. Over the next few days, I started the process. I met with a lawyer, explained the situation, and began preparing for what was sure to be a long, messy divorce. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right thing to do. The longer I held on to the hope that Rachel would come back and everything would magically go back to the way it was, the longer I would be stuck in the same cycle of pain and uncertainty. The kids took the news surprisingly well. Stacy was quiet when I told her, but I could see the relief in her eyes. I think, deep down, she knew this was coming. Jake had more questions, of course. He wanted to know why, if his mom loved him, she wouldn't just come home. I didn't have a good answer for him. So I did what I could. I held him close and promised that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure it would. Time passed slowly after that. Weeks turned into months, and little by little, I started to rebuild. I threw myself into work, not just to distract myself, but because I needed something to anchor me. I spent more time with the kids, took them out on weekends, tried to create some sense of normalcy for them. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. Rachel called less and less as the months went on. I think she knew that once the divorce was finalized, there wouldn't be much left to say. I had made my decision, and she had accepted it. And so, Just like that, the life I had known for over a decade came to an end. But as hard as it was, I knew I had made the right choice. I had given Rachel everything I had, and in the end, it wasn't enough. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was starting to think about what was best for me, for my future, for my kids. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to move on. After the phone call with Rachel, something shifted inside me. I expected to feel the crushing weight of regret, maybe even grief, but instead, I felt a strange sense of calm. It was over, and I had finally taken control. For the first time in months, I had made a decision for myself and the kids, not for her, not for Matt. And as strange as it sounds, that decision gave me a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't naive, though. I knew the road ahead was going to be rough. Divorce, kids caught in the middle, gossip around town, it was all waiting for me. But at least now I had a direction, a purpose. The divorce process moved slowly, as these things always do, but with each step, I felt like I was getting a little piece of myself back. The meetings with the lawyer, the paperwork, all of it reminded me that I was moving forward. I wasn't waiting around anymore, hoping that Rachel would change her mind. I was done hoping. Now, I was acting. One afternoon, a few weeks after I started the legal process, I found myself sitting in my car outside the lawyer's office, just staring out the window. The papers were in my hand, finalizing the terms of the divorce, but I hadn't signed them yet. I was waiting for a feeling to hit me, waiting for some kind of clarity. That was when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer it, but then I saw the name on the screen, Twyla Martin. She was the lawyer I had hired to handle the divorce. We had spent a lot of time together lately, discussing the details of the case, and over time, we had become more than just client and lawyer. She was smart, sharp, and she didn't take any nonsense from anyone. In a way, I guess you could say I admired her. Luke, it's Twyla. Are you all right? Her voice was calm, professional, but there was a note of concern that I hadn't expected. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Yeah, I am fine. Just thinking. You don't sound fine, she said, her tone softening. I know this isn't easy, but you doing the right thing, for yourself and your kids. Don't forget that. I appreciated her words, more than I would have admitted. Yeah, I know. It's final, you know? Signing these papers makes it real. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her nodding in understanding. I get it. It's a big step. But, Luke, staying in limbo won't do you any good either. You've been through hell these past few months. This is your chance to take control of your life again. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. She was right, of course. Twyla always had a way of cutting through the noise and getting to the heart of things. I like that about her. I sighed again and glanced down at the papers in my lap. You're right. I'll come by the office later to sign them. We said our goodbyes, and I sat there for a moment longer, staring at the signature line. My hand hovered over the paper, and for a second, I felt that familiar hesitation. But then I thought about everything: Rachel leaving, the kids' confusion, the way I had been hanging on to a life that no longer existed. And with a deep breath, I signed my name. It was done. Life after that started to settle into a new kind of normal. The kids and I fell into a routine. I'd get up early, make breakfast, get them off to school, and head to work. The nights were quiet, but in a way, they were peaceful. There were no more awkward conversations with Rachel, no more waiting by the phone, wondering when or if she would call. It was hard sometimes, especially when I would see the kids struggling. Stacy kept to herself more than usual, spending most of her time in her room with her headphones on, but at least she wasn't lashing out. Jake was the one who really needed me. He would come up to me at night, dragging his blanket behind him like he did when he was little, and ask if Mom was ever coming back. Is she still sick? He asked one night, his big eyes looking up at me from the foot of my bed. I had to take a deep breath to keep myself from breaking down right there. No, buddy. She's not sick, but she's not coming back either. Jake looked at me for a long time, like he was processing my words, trying to make sense of something that no kid should have to. And then, without another word, he climbed into bed beside me and fell asleep. I laid there with him, feeling the weight of everything. But somehow, in that moment, it felt like we were going to be okay. Maybe not right away, but eventually. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I started seeing Twyla more frequently. At first, it was just coffee here and there, talking about the case, about life, about everything that had happened. But eventually, coffee turned into dinners, and dinners turned into something more. It wasn't too serious at first. In fact, I think we were both hesitant to take things beyond casual. Twyla had her own baggage. She had been through a messy divorce herself a few years back, and she knew exactly what I was going through. Maybe that was why we connected so easily. We understood each other in a way that no one else could. One night, after dinner, we sat in her car outside my house, talking about everything but the thing we both knew was hanging between us. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if things had gone differently?" she asked, staring out the window. I shrugged. "Sometimes. But you can't change the past, you know? All you can do is try to learn from it and move on. Twyla smiled softly, turning to look at me. "That's a very mature answer, I chuckled. "What can I say? I'm a grown-up now, She laughed, and for a moment, the tension broke. But then the silence settled again, heavier this time, like we were both waiting for something to happen. Finally, Twyla turned to me, her expression more serious. "Look," she began slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I like spending time with you. A lot. But I don't want to rush into anything. I don't want either of us to get hurt. I nodded, understanding what she meant. "I feel the same way. I like you, Twyla, but I'm not sure I am ready for something serious right now." "Not yet. She smiled, and there was relief in her eyes. "I'm glad you said that, because neither am I. We sat there for a moment longer, the quiet between us comfortable now. There was no pressure, no rush. We were just two people trying to figure out how to move forward, one step at a time. Eventually, she leaned over and kissed me, soft and slow, and I kissed her back, savoring the moment. It wasn't the beginning of some grand romance, but it was something real, something honest. And after everything I had been through, that was enough for me. Over the next few months, things continued to change, little by little. I started spending more time with Twyla, but I made sure to keep things casual, at least for now. The kids were adjusting to the new normal, and I didn't want to throw too many changes at them all at once. Rachel, for the most part, stayed out of the picture. She sent the kids birthday cards and called occasionally, but it was clear that she had moved on with her life. I wasn't sure if she was still with Matt or not, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. That chapter of my life was over, and I wasn't going to dwell on it. I had my own life to live now. A life that, for the first time in a long time, felt like mine. It wasn't perfect. Hell, it wasn't even close. But it was mine. And that, I realized, was all I really needed. As time went on, I found that I was no longer looking back at what I had lost. Instead, I was looking forward to what was still ahead. It was a strange feeling, but a good one. And as for Rachel, well, I wasn't sure where she was, or what she was doing, but I hoped she found whatever it was she had been looking for, because I sure as hell had found mine. Life was quieter now, more peaceful in a way I hadn't known in years. The divorce was final, the kids were adjusting, and my relationship with Twyla was steady but unhurried. It felt like I was finally finding my footing again, like I had walked through a storm and made it out the other side. But peace has a way of lulling you into a false sense of security, and just when I thought I had it all figured out, the past came knocking. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was grilling out in the backyard with Jake. He had recently taken an interest in helping me with manly chores, as he liked to call them. Stacy was inside, likely glued to her phone or lost in whatever teenage drama was consuming her attention. The day was perfect: blue skies, the smell of burgers on the grill, and the sound of Jake asking questions about everything from football to grilling techniques. But then my phone buzzed. I glanced down at it, expecting maybe a text from Twyla or something work-related. Instead, it was a name I hadn't seen in months. Rachel? My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard from her directly since the divorce had been finalized. The kids spoke to her occasionally, but I had kept my distance. Our last conversation had made things perfectly clear. Still, there was an undeniable curiosity that pulled me toward the phone. "Jake, Keep an eye on the grill for a second, I said, walking over to the edge of the yard for a little privacy. I took a deep breath and answered, Rachel. Hey, Luke. Her voice was quieter than I remembered, softer, almost like the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. How are you? I frowned, not sure what to make of the small talk. I am fine. We're fine. Kids are good. You? There was a pause, and I could hear her exhale like she was bracing herself. I'm back in town. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't anticipated hearing them again. Back in town? I repeated. For how long? I don't know, she said, her voice tentative. Maybe for good. I felt a flash of frustration rise in me. She was back? After all this time? After months of silence, she was just back? Does that mean Matt? I trailed off, not really wanting to finish the question. He passed away 2 months ago, she said quietly. It was peaceful. He was ready. There it was. The chapter of her life with Matt was closed, just like that. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. Relief? Sympathy? Resentment? The truth was, it was probably a mix of all three. I'm sorry for your loss, I said, my voice neutral. I had nothing more to offer her. Not anymore. Thank you, she replied, the words hanging in the air for a beat too long. I didn't expect you to care, but I appreciate it. I ran a hand through my hair, still trying to process the fact that she was back. So what now, Rachel? What do you want? She hesitated again, and when she spoke, her voice cracked. I want to see the kids. Of course she did. She had every right to, even if part of me wanted to keep them away from her, to shield them from the emotional whirlwind she had caused by leaving in the first place. But I wasn't that kind of person, and I knew it wasn't fair to the kids to keep them from their mother. No matter how complicated my feelings were, they still loved her. They here, I said finally. You can come by tomorrow. I'll let them know you want to see them. She sounded relieved. Thanks, Luke. I know this is a lot. I wasn't sure how to do this. I exhaled, not entirely sure myself how we had gotten to this point. You made your choice, Rachel. Now you've got to live with the consequences. But the kids, I stopped, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. The kids deserve to see you. Just don't mess with their heads. I want tea, she said softly. I promise. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone, feeling the familiar mix of emotions swirling inside me. She was back. After all this time, after all the hurt, she was back in town, looking to reconnect with the kids. I wasn't sure how they were going to take it, but I knew I had to let them decide. That evening, I sat down with Stacy and Jake after dinner. They had sensed something was up, probably from the way I had been distracted ever since that phone call with Rachel. Guys, I need to tell you something, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Your mom, she's back in town. She wants to see you. Stacy's face went blank, her expression guarded as usual. Jake, on the other hand, lit up, his eyes wide with excitement. Mom's back, he asked eagerly. When can we see her? I glanced at Stacy, who still hadn't said a word. I knew this was going to hit her differently than it hit Jake. She was old enough to understand the complexity of the situation, to feel the sting of her mother's absence in a way that Jake, at his age, hadn't fully grasped yet. She wants to see you both tomorrow, I said carefully, watching their reactions. But I need you to understand something. Your mom, she's been through a lot. Things won't go back to the way they were, but that doesn't mean you can't have a relationship with her. You just need to take it one step at a time. Jake nodded eagerly, clearly excited at the idea of seeing Rachel again. Stacy, though, just crossed her arms and stared down at the table, her lips pressed into a thin line. Do you want to see her? I asked gently, trying to get her to open up. She shrugged, her eyes never leaving the table. I don't know, she muttered. Why does she want to come back now? After all this time? I didn't have an answer for that. I had been asking myself the same question since Rachel's call. I don't know, Stace, but I think she is trying. I can't speak for her, but I think she wants to make things right. Stacy finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. You think it's that easy? She can just come back and everything is fine? No, I said softly. It is not that easy. But she is still your mom. And you get to decide how you want to handle this. I want to make you see her if you don't want to. But she is here, and she wants to try. Stacy was quiet for a long time, then finally sighed. I'll see her, but I'm not ready to forgive her. I nodded, understanding. That is okay. You don't have to. The next day came quickly. Rachel showed up at the house right on time, and the kids were waiting. Jake practically bouncing with excitement, and Stacy standing off to the side, arms crossed, her face a mask of indifference. I stayed back, giving them space, watching from the doorway as Rachel embraced Jake, holding him tight as tears welled up in her eyes. Stacy, on the other hand, barely moved. She let Rachel hug her, but her body language was stiff, cold. "Hi, sweetheart," Rachel whispered to Stacy, her voice trembling. Stacy didn't respond, just stood there, staring off into the distance. Rachel tried again, brushing a hand over Stacy's hair. "I missed you." "Yeah, well," Stacy muttered, pulling away. "You missed a lot." I could see the pain in Rachel's eyes, but I stayed quiet. This was their moment, and I wasn't going to interfere. Rachel had to face the consequences of her choices, and Stacy had every right to feel the way she did. The visit was short, awkward even, but it was a start. And maybe that was all it could be for now, just a start. Rebuilding relationships after so much damage takes time, and I wasn't expecting a miracle. I wasn't expecting anything, really. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to find a way forward. A chance for all of us. That night, after Rachel had left and the kids were in bed, I sat out on the back porch, sipping a beer and staring up at the stars. The air was cool, the world quiet around me, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt a sense of peace. Rachel had come back, but she wasn't my problem anymore. She had her journey, and I had mine. My life was different now, and it wasn't about looking back. It was about looking forward, to whatever came next. And as I sat there, the weight of everything that had happened over the past year finally began to lift. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to face it. The days after Rachel's return were strangely quiet. She saw the kids a few more times, and while Jake was always eager to spend time with her, Stacy remained distant. I didn't push either of them. I let them handle it in their own way. Rachel and I didn't talk much, beyond the basics of scheduling when she'd see the kids. There was no need for anything more. We had said everything that needed to be said a long time ago. As time passed, I realized something important. I didn't care anymore. The anger, the resentment, even the sadness, it had all faded away, like a fog lifting after a long, dark night. Rachel wasn't a part of my life now, and I was okay with that. What mattered was the kids and how I was going to be the best father I could be for them. Work kept me busy, and Twyla and I continued to see each other. Things were good between us, steady and comfortable. We hadn't put any labels on what we were doing, but that was fine by me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't in a rush. I wasn't looking for anything beyond the present. Life had taught me that the future was unpredictable, and sometimes, the best thing you can do is just take things one day at a time. A few weeks after Rachel's return, I took Jake and Stacy out for a day trip to a state park. It wasn't something we had done in a while, and I thought it would be good for all of us to get away from the routine for a bit. We hiked through the trails, Jake running ahead, full of energy, while Stacy walked beside me, her silence less guarded than it had been lately. As we reached a clearing that overlooked a valley, we stopped to take in the view. The sky was a brilliant blue, stretching out for miles, and for a moment, we just stood there in quiet awe. "Dad," Stacy said after a while, her voice soft but clear. "Yeah, kiddo?" I turned to look at her, surprised she was ready to talk. "I've been thinking a lot about Mom," she said, staring out at the horizon, about how she left and why she did it. I waited, letting her find the words she needed. "I don't get it. I don't get how she could just leave like that. And I don't know if I'll ever understand." But she paused, her eyes clouded with thought. "I think I'm ready to stop being so mad at her. Not for her, but for me. Being angry all the time, it's exhausting. I felt a swell of pride in my chest. Stacy had always been mature for her age, But hearing her say this, seeing her make that decision for herself, was something else entirely. You don't have to forgive her if you're not ready, I said gently. It is okay to feel what you feel, but I'm proud of you for recognizing that. It is not easy. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I know. I'm not ready to forgive her yet, but I don't want to keep holding on to all this anger. It is too heavy. We stood there in silence for a few more moments before Jake came running back, his face flushed with excitement. Dad, come see this. There's a huge rock over there that looks like a dinosaur head. I chuckled and ruffled his hair. All right, lead the way, buddy. As we followed Jake through the trees, I couldn't help but think about how far we had all come. A year ago, everything had felt like it was falling apart, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way beneath me. But now, things felt different, more stable, more hopeful. I had learned a lot about myself over the past year. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive losing Rachel and come out the other side not just okay, but better. I had learned that the people who truly care about you don't just walk away when things get tough. And most importantly, I had learned that moving on doesn't mean forgetting or erasing the past. It means accepting it, learning from it, and choosing to build something new. That evening, after we got back from the park, I got a text from Twyla. She had been out of town for a few days, visiting her sister, and we hadn't talked much while she was gone. Twyla, hey, I'm back. Want to grab dinner tomorrow? I smiled at the text. Things between us had been good, simple, easy. And after everything that had happened, that was exactly what I needed. Me, sounds perfect. How about 7? As I hit send, I realized how much things had changed in just a few months. I wasn't sitting around waiting for someone else to make decisions about my life anymore. I was making them for myself. The next day, I met Twyla at a small restaurant downtown. It was one of those places with dim lighting, cozy booths, and a relaxed atmosphere. Perfect for what I hoped would be a quiet, no-pressure evening. When she walked in, looking as calm and composed as ever, I felt a sense of ease wash over me. Hey, stranger, she said with a smile as she slid into the booth across from me. Hey yourself, I replied, feeling a warmth in my chest that hadn't been there in a long time. We ordered drinks and settled into conversation, talking about everything from work to the kids, to her trip to see her sister. It was easy, the kind of effortless conversation that I hadn't had with anyone in years. At one point, as we were waiting for our food, Twyla leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. How are you, Luke? I mean, really? You've been through a lot. I paused, considering the question. How was I? It was a question I had asked myself so many times over the past year, and for the first time, I felt like I had a real answer. I am good, I said, meeting her gaze. I really am. It has been a tough year, but I think I'm finally in a place where I can say that I'm okay. Better than okay. Actually. Twyla smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I'm glad to hear that. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and conversation. When it was time to leave, we walked out into the cool night air, and for a moment, we stood there, lingering by her car. I could feel the pull between us, the unspoken understanding that whatever was happening between us, it was real. Thanks for tonight, I said, feeling more at peace than I had in years. Anytime, she replied, her eyes soft as she looked up at me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for something to go wrong. I was just living in the moment, and for now, that was enough. As I kissed Twyla goodnight and watched her drive away, I felt a sense of contentment settle over me. The past was behind me, and while it would always be a part of who I was, it didn't define me anymore. I had a new life now, a new chapter, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to turn the page. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything that had brought me to this point. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the pain. It had all shaped me into the person I was now. Stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. I didn't know what the future held for me and Twyla, or what my relationship with Rachel would look like as time went on. But that was okay. I didn't need all the answers right now. For once, I was content to let life unfold, one day at a time. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew one thing for certain. I was going to be just fine. We all were. The end.